The body was still warm when Detective Kira Voss arrived. That should have been the first clue. But in 2200, even corpses were complicated. The man, mid-40s, dark coat, City ID badge reading Director Elias Vorn, North Atlantic Space Command, lay face down in the rain-slicked corridor of the Orbital Transit Hub, 40 floors above the Pacific Shelf. The building's environmental systems maintained a precise 21 degrees Celsius. He had been there, according to the hub's neural mesh security log, for 6 minutes. His body temperature should have already begun its slow descent. It hadn't. Kira crouched beside him, pressing 2 fingers to the wrist out of old habit. Protocols had changed since her academy days. The biometric glove she wore registered everything automatically, feeding data to her corneal display in neat amber columns. Heart rate, 0. Blood pressure, 0. Core temp, 37.2 degrees and holding. Bodies don't stay warm, she said aloud. Her partner, Detective Sable Okafor, looked up from his own scan across the corridor. They do if the environment is warm. It isn't. She stood, studying the readout again. 37.2. Sable. That's a live person temperature. That's not a man who's been lying on a cold floor. Could be a sensor error. Could be. She stared at Director Vorn's face, turned sideways against the marble floor. The skin was wrong, too, pale in a way that wasn't asphyxia or exsanguination. Pale like something that had stopped performing the color. She filed the thought away, tucked it into the small mental drawer she kept for things she didn't yet understand. Ruling? Okafor asked. Cardiac event, pending autopsy. Simple. Nothing about this is simple. She straightened, glancing at the rain hammering the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Pacific spread silver and indifferent below them. Somewhere out past the storm, a dozen military transports were holding orbit, waiting for the handoff that had been scheduled for 3 days from now, the largest peacetime transfer of naval space assets in human history. The Atlantic Accord. 16 warships, 4 orbital platforms, and a weapons array that could render a moon uninhabitable. All of it, moving to a joint administrative body that barely 2 years ago had barely had a name. Director Vorn had been the man who signed the transfer. Who found him? Kira asked. Cleaning drone. Flagged the biometric absence and called it in. No witnesses. No footage. Okafor's jaw tightened. Mesh records show a 17-second gap in the corridor feed, starting 30 seconds before estimated time of death. She turned to look at him. 17 seconds was not a glitch. 17 seconds, in a building with 6 redundancy recording systems, was a decision. Get me his full itinerary for the last 3 weeks, she said. Meetings, comms, any off-the-record contacts. And I want the autopsy prioritized. It won't be. He's Space Command. Then I'll sit in myself. She took one last look at Elias Vorn, at the wrong temperature, wrong color body with no heartbeat and no answers, and walked toward the elevator, already knowing that this was going to be the case that changed everything. Dr. Irene Lau worked nights. She preferred it. The city's light pollution thinned after midnight, and through the lab's high windows she could sometimes see the orbital stations tracking slow silver lines across the sky. She liked being reminded of how large everything was. She did not like what she found inside Elias Vorn. I need you to look at something, she told Kira, 2 days after the body was brought in. No greeting. No preamble. She pulled back the examination sheet and pointed. Kira looked. The chest cavity was open, ribs spread in the standard access position. Everything appeared correct: lungs, diaphragm, pericardial sac, the neat architecture of a human interior. Except, where's the heart? Kira asked. It's there. Lau pointed to a dark mass the size and rough shape of a human heart, positioned correctly in the pericardium. It just isn't a heart. Kira leaned closer. The organ was darker than cardiac tissue, with a texture that looked more like dried resin than muscle. Its surface was smooth in places, roughened in others, interrupted by structures that Kira could only describe as joints, articulated segments, like the plates of some deep-sea crustacean. What is it? She asked. I don't know. Lau's voice was flat and careful, the voice of a scientist choosing words like stepping stones over deep water. The tissue doesn't match any known taxonomy. It doesn't match any tissue I've ever encountered or read about. It has no mitochondria. It appears to use a chemical process I can't identify to produce something. Not ATP. Something else. Was it functional? It was producing measurable electrical signals as recently as 4 hours ago. Lau paused. He's been dead for 48 hours, Detective. The silence stretched between them. I need a DNA profile, Kira said. I ran one. Lau pulled up a display, a genomic readout, familiar cascades of base pairs and markers. 91% human. The remaining 9% doesn't match anything in any database. Terran or otherwise. Terran or otherwise. The phrase landed quietly. In 2200, otherwise was more than hypothetical. First contact with extraterrestrial microbial life had been confirmed on Titan's subsurface in 2091, and 3 separate candidate signals from deep space had been classified as probable artificial origin since then. The question of whether humanity was alone had been answered. The question of what came next had not. Who else has seen this? Kira asked. Just me. And now you. Lock it down. Medical privilege, my authorization. No other pathologists, no morgue staff, no automated filing. I can hold the digital records for 72 hours before the system flags them for mandatory upload. Then I have 72 hours. Kira straightened, looking at the thing that was not a heart. Thank you, Irene. Don't talk to anyone. She was already dialing Okafor as she stepped into the corridor. He didn't answer. She went back to first principles. She pulled Vorn's itinerary, which took 3 days and 2 separate warrant applications to obtain, not because the data was sensitive, but because every request was routed through administrators who seemed to work very slowly and CC too many people. She noticed this. In the 6 weeks before his death, Director Vorn had met with 37 individuals. Kira built a contact map, the old-fashioned way, physical paper, pinned to the cork wall of her secondary office, the one her department didn't know she kept in her own apartment. She didn't trust the cloud for this. She hadn't trusted it for years, not since she'd noticed the small ways her case files were occasionally accessed by addresses that didn't resolve cleanly. Of the 37 contacts, 22 were other Space Command officials, all connected to the Atlantic Accord. Kira flagged them and moved on. 8 were civilian contractors, engineers, logistics coordinators, a xenolinguistics professor named Dr. Farido Say who worked at the Helsinki Institute. She flagged those 2. The remaining 7 had no records. Not redacted records. Not classified records. No records. Names that didn't exist in any registry, civil or military. Biometric matches that returned null results. Addresses that, when she physically visited them over the following week, turned out to be empty commercial units, recently leased and recently vacated. 7 ghosts. She was staring at the ghost names on her paper map, 3 empty coffee cups beside her, when her phone rang. Physical ring, not neural. She answered. Detective Voss. The voice was careful. Male. Slightly accented in a way she couldn't place. I knew Elias Vorn. I need to speak with you. Not over the network. In person. Who is this? Someone who can tell you what you found in his chest. A pause. You found it by now. I know you have. You went to the pathologist yourself. She was silent for 5 seconds, processing implications. Where? She said. Mariners Green. Southeast corner. Tomorrow at 0700. Come alone. Come without your police-issue hardware. Another pause. They monitor the hardware. The line went dead. His name was Tomas Veer, or so he said. He was thin, perhaps 60, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent years in environments that aged people. Deep space, high pressure, conflict zones. He sat on a bench in the green and watched the pigeons with an attention that struck Kira as performed. People who are genuinely watching birds don't track peripheral movement with their eyes. You're expecting company, she said, sitting beside him. I'm always expecting company. That's how I've survived. He turned to look at her. His eyes were very dark. How much do you know? About what? About what's been happening for the last 200 years. She said nothing, which was the right answer. They came in 2003, he said. Quietly. No ships, no invasion, just a transfer of biological matter, carried inside 11 individuals who presented themselves at entry points on 6 continents. Immigration records show them as refugees, as business travelers, as tourists. They were none of those things. What were they? They were the first shade. He said the word without drama. That's what they call themselves. In their own language, which we can't reproduce, the phonemic range is different. The name translates roughly to those who precede the light, or possibly those who come before the flame. The translation is contested. How do you know any of this? Because I've been watching them for 20 years. I used to work for a man who watched them for 30 years before that. And he got the information from the woman who discovered them in the first place. He reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of paper, actual paper, printed not handwritten. Elias Vorn was one of ours. He was human. Entirely human. He was also the 7th person in our network to be killed in the last 4 months. Kira took the paper. It was a list of names. 60, 70 names, spanning decades, with dates beside each. These people are all dead, she asked. The ones with a line through them, yes. The others are currently living. Currently watching. He folded his hands. The Shade have been here for 2 centuries. In that time, they've achieved positions of influence in 43 national governments, 19 militaries, 8 space agencies, and 3 of the 7 major corporations that manufacture orbital infrastructure. They don't conquer. They don't fight. They wait. For what? Tomas Veer looked back at the pigeons. For the fleet, he said. For the Atlantic Accord. 16 warships and 4 orbital platforms, transferred to an administrative body that is, and I need you to understand the significance of what I'm saying, controlled at the highest level by the Shade. Once those ships are under their command, they will open a corridor. A signal corridor. To wherever their home system is. Kira thought about the thing in Elias Vorn's chest. How do you recognize them? She asked. For the first time, something crossed Tomas Veer's face that she couldn't read. Carefully, he said. She started seeing it everywhere, once she knew how to look. The eyes first. It was something Veer had mentioned, light reflection, slightly wrong, slightly too uniform, and once she understood what he meant she couldn't unsee it. Human eyes have irregular reflectivity. The pupils are absorptive, the irises reflective in complex ways depending on pigmentation, the cornea adds its own specular layer. When you shine a light at a human eye, the result is complicated and a little ugly. When you shone a light at a Shade eye, the result was perfect. A single clean reflection, like a mirror, without the chromatic scatter that mammalian eyes produced. She'd only noticed it once, in the corridor outside her department's briefing room, when a beam of afternoon light caught the eyes of Assistant Commissioner Dane Perth, her superior's superior, a decorated 40-year veteran of the European Security Directorate, and she saw it, one clean circle of light, where there should have been a scattered glow. She hadn't looked away in time. He had noticed her notice. She'd walked back to her desk very carefully and spent the afternoon catching up on unrelated paperwork with the focused energy of someone not panicking. The shadows were next. She had almost written it off as a visual artifact, a quirk of the hub's mixed spectrum lighting, when she noticed it for the 3rd time during a routine meeting. The shadows of 3 specific attendees moved a fraction of a second behind the attendees themselves. Not the environmental shadows, those were correct. The cast shadows on the walls. They lagged. A quarter second, maybe less, but enough if you were watching, if you knew how to see. She had not told Okafor. She wanted to. Okafor had been her partner for 6 years and she trusted him the way she trusted gravity. But Veer's list had 70 names on it, and she checked 7 of them through the city registry, and 4 of the 7 worked in law enforcement, and 2 of those 4 were in her precinct. She didn't know who. That was the problem. She didn't know who, and until she did, she couldn't trust anyone. The heartbeat was the most reliable tell, but also the most dangerous to test. Shade bodies had no cardiac activity. The organ Lau had found in Vorn was not his heart, it was something else, but its electrical signature was different enough that a standard biometric scan would register no heartbeat. The problem was that a standard biometric scan also required proximity. Contact. An excuse. She started manufacturing excuses. A handshake with a biometric-sensitive glove. A brief embrace with a pressure sensor stitched into her jacket lining. She scanned 11 people in her immediate professional orbit over 2 weeks. 2 of them registered no heartbeat. One was a junior analyst named Petra Holst. The other was Assistant Commissioner Perth. She was careful, and it wasn't enough. Whatever the Shade used for surveillance was better than what she'd expected. On the 18th day of her investigation, she arrived at her secondary office to find the cork wall bare, not torn down, not vandalized, but organized. Her pinned notes had been repositioned into a neat single cluster in the center of the board, precisely overlapping, as if to say we know what you know, and we're making no attempt to hide that we know it. She left the apartment without taking anything and walked 14 blocks to a public transit hub, bought a physical ticket with physical cash, and rode to the other side of the city. The next morning, 2 things happened simultaneously. Her department issued an internal alert flagging her as potentially compromised pending review, which was human resources language for "you've become a problem," and a delivery drone dropped an unmarked package at the address she was now using. Inside the package, a folded note with 5 words, "They know about the list," and a small earpiece, obviously homemade, operating on a frequency below standard monitoring ranges. She put the earpiece in. "Detective Voss." It was Veer's voice. "Don't respond. Don't look for cameras. Just walk north and listen." She walked north. "We've lost 3 more in the last week. They're accelerating their cleanup before the transfer. The accord signing is in 9 days. A pause of static. "I'm going to tell you something that took me 20 years to learn. The Shade are not malevolent. They don't hate humans. They simply do not consider us in their calculation. We are infrastructure. A planet they've been slowly, patiently, over 2 centuries, preparing to repurpose. They feel nothing about this. And that makes them vastly more dangerous than any enemy who hates you." She turned north onto the waterfront promenade, wind off the Pacific cold against her face. "You need to reach the Ashford," Veer said. "She's the last ship in the pre-accord fleet with a command staff that has been verified entirely human. She's scheduled to be among the first transferred. Her captain is a woman named Seriva Lund. She doesn't know any of this. She's good, and she's loyal, and she's been kept deliberately in the dark. You need to get to her before the Accord handoff." "How do I get off-world without Space Command authorization?" Kira said quietly, barely moving her lips. "There's a cargo manifest filed under a shell corporation. The registration is in the list I gave you, 3rd page, near the bottom. A freighter called the McKean Osei. It runs supply to the construction platforms in low orbit. It departs in 48 hours from Bay 17 of the Pacific Launch Complex." A long pause. "I'm sorry, Detective. I know this isn't what you signed up for." "No," she agreed. She kept walking. 3 blocks later, she noticed the reflection. In a shop window, 2 figures maintaining precise distance behind her, neither looking in her direction. One was Petra Holst, the analyst with no heartbeat, now wearing civilian clothes. The other was a person Kira had never seen before, tall, light-absorbent in the way the Shade could be, drawing slightly less ambient illumination than the people around them. Kira broke into a run. She'd spent 12 years in police work. She knew how to disappear inside a city. She went underground, not metaphorically but literally, into the tidal maintenance corridors that ran below the Pacific waterfront, built in the 2180s to manage the sea-level infrastructure that kept the lower city above water. She'd worked a case down here once, 3 years ago, a smuggling ring that had mapped every channel and junction. She still had the maps in her head. 4 hours in the tunnels. Then up through an access shaft in the old port district, into a neighborhood whose network coverage had been patchy since a transformer fire in 2197 and nobody had gotten around to fixing it. She bought a change of clothes from a second-hand stall. She ate a bowl of noodles at a counter restaurant and watched the door. She was not followed. She spent the next 30 hours preparing. She pulled together everything she knew into a compressed data package. The pathology report, the contact list, the genomic analysis, her biometric readings, Veer's testimony as she could reconstruct it. She encrypted it with a personal key she'd generated offline, air-gapped, using a methodology that predated modern network integration. If she died, the package needed to survive and reach someone who could use it. She thought about who that person might be. Not law enforcement, too infiltrated. Not government, same. Not military. The Accord had given the Shade's agents access to the highest levels of Space Command. The press. She considered it. A simultaneous release to 100 journalists, flooding every channel with the evidence before anyone could suppress it. But she had no proof yet that would survive scrutiny. The pathology report alone would be dismissed as falsified, the biometric readings as equipment error. Without the fleet, without the Ashford and Captain Lund and an actual confrontation with what the Shade were doing, she had puzzle pieces and no picture. She needed the fleet. On the night before departure, she contacted Tomas Veer through the earpiece. Static for a long time, and then his voice, quieter than before. Bay 17. The manifest name is Kira Mwanda. Don't use your real identification anywhere. He paused. I have to tell you something. Tell me. I've been running from them for 20 years. I've had very little hope. But I believe that if there's a moment, a single moment where a human with evidence and access and the willingness to use both can change the trajectory of this, it's the next 9 days. Another pause. I'm not able to help you further. I'm in a difficult situation. Veer. She waited. What does a difficult situation mean? It means they've found me. It means I've had a good run. His voice was composed in a way that sounded very final. Good luck, detective. The earpiece went silent. She sat alone in the dark for several minutes. Then she got up, put on her coat, and went to Bay 17. The freighter was ugly in a utilitarian way of working ships, a central habitation cylinder attached to a spine of cargo modules, bristling with attitude thrusters and docking hardware. Its captain was a 50-year-old woman named Hadley Joss who asked Kira no questions beyond "Can you work a manifest interface?" and handed her a tablet when the answer was yes. Kira worked the manifest interface. She cataloged 17,000 units of construction material and 432 crates of food supplies destined for Platform 7 of the Atlantic Accord staging area. She ate a meal in the galley with 3 crew members who were interested in a card game she didn't know and taught it to her without condescension. She slept 3 hours in a bunk the size of a large coffin. The launch itself was nothing, a chemical thump, a minute of high G, and then the slow, magnificent silence of orbit. She pressed her face to the narrow porthole beside her bunk and watched the Earth resolve into a curve, the Pacific a bruised blue-gray below the cloud layer, the Terminator line drawing its slow geometry across the night side. It was the first time she'd been off-world. She was surprised by how much it mattered, the sudden, bone-deep understanding that everything she'd ever known was down there, small and fragile and being systematically compromised from the inside. She had 7 days until the Accord signing. On the second orbital day, while running the manifest interface in the forward cargo office, she identified 3 Shade among the machined Osei's crew. Not by the eyes this time, the ship's lighting was too diffuse. By the shadows. The freighter's habitation cylinder ran a synthetic daylight cycle, and in the simulated afternoon light of the common area, she watched 3 crew members whose shadows arrived precisely 0.27 seconds after they did. She counted it. She counted it 3 times. She did not react. She went back to the manifest. She updated crate counts that did not need updating. She spent the next 4 hours composing a message, brief, dense, encoded in a protocol that Veer had taught her, and embedded it in a routine diagnostic ping addressed to the Ashford's navigation maintenance system. The message was simple. I'm coming. 7 days. Shade have infiltrated Space Command at the highest levels. The Accord is a mechanism for fleet transfer to alien control. I have evidence. I need an hour with Captain Lund. I will explain everything. Do not reply through official channels. She sent it. She didn't know if Captain Lund would believe it. She didn't know if Lund was human. She'd calculated odds. The Shade had, according to Veer's assessment, penetrated roughly 30% of senior Space Command positions. 70% were still human. Those were odds she'd take. On the 3rd day, the machined Osei docked at Platform 7. Kira moved through the cargo transfer in her Kira Mwanda identity, noting with professional attention the security checkpoints, the personnel flow patterns, the 6 Space Command officers who rotated through the platform in 12-hour shifts. 2 of them had the eyes. She avoided them. She found a maintenance crawlway that the platform schematics, embedded in the manifest system, accessible to cargo contractors, showed running alongside the docking ring. On day 5 of 7, she found a way aboard the Ashford. Captain Seriva Lund was everything Veer's description had implied: compact, precise, deeply unimpressed. She also had a heartbeat. Kira felt it when they shook hands, through the sensor in her jacket lining, a strong, regular, entirely biological cardiac rhythm. She almost laughed with relief. "You're not on my crew manifest," Lund said. They were in her private ready room, the captain's door locked. Because Kira had found the captain's private access code in the maintenance crawlway, it had been scratched, very faintly, into the conduit housing by someone who'd been there before her, someone who'd known this moment might come. Veer, she suspected. Or someone in his network. "No," Kira said. "You've committed about 14 separate criminal offenses getting here." "Yes." "And you're telling me that the Atlantic Accord, the single largest peacetime diplomatic achievement in human history, ratified by 47 nations, 2 years in negotiation, is a mechanism for an alien species to take control of this fleet?" "Yes." Lund's expression did not change. "Show me your evidence." She spent 3 hours in that ready room. She laid out everything: the pathology report, the genomic analysis, the biometric readings, the shadow and eye phenomena, the list of shade-occupied positions, the 17-second gap in the security feed, the 7 ghosts on Vorn's contact list. She explained what the shade were and what they'd been doing for 2 centuries. She explained the corridor, the signal, the plan. Lund listened. She asked 6 questions, all of them precise, all aimed at the methodology of Kira's evidence rather than its conclusions. She was not alarmed. She was not dismissive. She was, Kira realized, exactly the kind of person you needed in the room when the world was ending. "I can verify the genomic analysis independently," Lund said finally. "I have a biosciences officer I trust. She'll run it without knowing why." "How long?" 4 hours. "We have 41 hours before the transfer ceremony." "Then I'll have her run it in 2. Lund stood, straightening her uniform jacket with the automatic gesture of someone who straightened their jacket when they needed to think. "If you're right, we have a problem. If you're wrong, I'm going to have you arrested." "If I'm wrong," Kira said, "I'll arrest myself." The biosciences officer's results came back in 90 minutes. Lund read them standing at her desk, her face very still. "Brief me on the command structure," she said. "Who's compromised?" "All of it." There were 36 senior Space Command officers aboard Platform 7 and the 6 vessels currently in the Accord staging area. Using Kira's biometric methodology, Lund had her most trusted staff perform discrete scans, handshakes, equipment adjustments, guided tours of engineering sections. On every officer they could reach over the following 18 hours. 19 of them had no heartbeat. 19 out of 36. Lund sat with that number for a long time. "They've been positioning people for this for decades," she said. "For at least 20 years in the military hierarchy," Kira confirmed. "Possibly longer." "The 4-star who's presiding over the transfer ceremony." "Admiral Crest." Kira had already checked. "No heartbeat." "The Accord's civilian liaison." "No heartbeat." The 3 officers designated to input the command authorization codes for the transfer. 2 of 3. Lund drummed her fingers on the desk. "We can't arrest 19 Space Command officers without evidence that will hold in a civilian court. And we can't alert Earthside authorities without going through channels that are, by your own evidence, also compromised." "We don't arrest them," Kira said. "We expose them. Publicly. Simultaneously. In a way that can't be suppressed." "How?" Kira had been thinking about this for 3 days. "The transfer ceremony," she said, "is being broadcast live. 47-nation joint transmission. Real-time neural feed to every major media network. There will be no delay. The Shade positioned it that way, so the transfer would be witnessed and therefore irreversible." She looked at Lund. "They've given us the mechanism. We use their own broadcast." Lund was quiet. "What are you suggesting exactly?" she asked. "I'm suggesting that during the live ceremony, we demonstrate, in front of every person watching, what the Shade are. Not with a document or an analysis or a report. Physically. Visibly. Undeniably." Kira paused. "I'm suggesting we make it impossible to look away." Lund was good at logistics. It was, she said, the primary skill of command. Not heroism, not strategy, but the methodical decomposition of a complex objective into achievable steps, tracked and coordinated and timed. Step 1. Secure the Ashford entirely. Her crew of 212 were, with 3 exceptions, all identified, all now confined to quarters under medical pretext, human. The 3 exceptions were relieved without incident. One of them, during the process, displayed a brief failure of its human mimicry, and 3 crew members witnessed something underneath that sent 2 of them to the infirmary for stress and sedation. Step 2. Establish secure communication with the 4 other vessels whose command staff had been fully verified. The Brennan, the Tarana, the Villiers Cross, and the Deep Space Survey ship Kessler, which was the oldest vessel in the fleet and whose captain, a 68-year-old man named Aldo Ferreira, had apparently been suspicious of the Accord for 18 months without quite knowing why. "I kept thinking it moved too fast," Ferreira told Lund, over the verified private channel. 2 years is nothing for an agreement of that scope. Every major space treaty in history took 10, 15 years. Why the hurry? Because they needed the ships before we noticed what was happening, Lund told him. A silence. "Tell me what you need," Ferreira said. Step 3. Prepare the evidence package for broadcast. Kira spent 11 hours on this. She had the genomic analyses, the pathology documentation, the biometric records, the 17-second security gap, the full contact mapping, the testimony she could reconstruct from Veer's communications. She organized it into a sequence that told a story, not a story for specialists but a story for anyone watching. She tested it against the assumption of a viewer who knew nothing, who had never heard the name Shade, who was tuning in to see a diplomatic ceremony and instead found themselves watching something that would redefine human history. She tried to make it undeniable. She tried very hard. Step 4. The demonstration itself. For this, Lund came up with the mechanism. She had access to the ceremony's broadcast system. The Ashford was the designated relay vessel, a fact the Shade had arranged specifically because the Ashford's command position was supposed to have been filled by an officer who did not have a heartbeat. The officer had been reassigned at the last moment due to a medical review that Lund had initiated 3 days ago, before Kira's arrival, acting on a hunch she hadn't been able to articulate. "I kept looking at him during briefings," Lund said. "The way his shadow moved. I thought I was tired." "You weren't," Kira said. The demonstration required one thing, a moment during the ceremony where the Shade officers could be identified, recorded, and revealed simultaneously in a way that could not be retracted or explained away. For this, Kira had an idea that was either brilliant or catastrophic. She explained it to Lund. Lund looked at her for a long moment. "That's going to make a lot of people very afraid," Lund said. "Yes," Kira agreed. "It might cause panic. Some. Temporary. The alternative is 16 warships and 4 orbital platforms under alien command and a signal corridor opening to a civilization that's been planning this for 200 years. Yes. Lund nodded slowly. Then we do it. The ceremony began at 1,200 hours, orbital standard. The broadcast was, as designed, simultaneous and global, the largest single viewership event since the Titan confirmation in 2091. 31 billion people watching on neural feeds, screens, public arrays, educational systems. The platform's main ceremonial bay was dressed in the flags of 47 nations, an architectural achievement of international symbolism that had taken 8 months to design. Admiral Crest presided. He was tall, decorated, projecting the measured authority of a man who'd given his career to the defense of Earth. He was also, Kira knew, not a man at all. She was watching from the Ashford's broadcast control room, Lund beside her, the 5 verified human vessels holding position around the platform in a formation that looked ceremonial and was not. The ceremony proceeded through its initial stages. Speeches. Acknowledgements. The ceremonial unveiling of the Joint Command insignia, a piece of design that had been in the press for months and that Kira now understood was a symbol not of human unity but of something else entirely. A marker, she suspected, a signal for the Shade already embedded across Earth that the moment had come. At 1,247 hours, Admiral Crest began reading the transfer authorization. Kira activated the broadcast override. It was a technical capability that the Ashford had as relay vessel, an emergency preemption protocol, designed for solar flare warnings and military emergencies, that could interrupt any signal carried through the relay and substitute alternate content for the duration of the override. It was designed for 30 seconds. They used it for 12 minutes. The shade aboard the platform didn't understand what was happening immediately. They understood that the broadcast feed had changed, but the override was internal to the Ashford systems, and they had no way to interrupt it from the ceremony bay. What they did not immediately understand was what was being broadcast. Kira's evidence package went first, 2 minutes of compressed, clearly organized documentation, with her voice narrating it. Genomic analyses, pathology images, biometric records, the security gap, the contact mapping. All of it, delivered to 31 billion people in the plainest possible language. Then, the demonstration. This was Lund's mechanism. She'd had her engineering team modify the ceremony bay's environmental lighting array, the lights that were, at this moment, illuminating the historic event for the watching world, to cycle, for 3 seconds, through a high-frequency strobed output in a specific spectrum that the Shade's visual system could not adapt to in real time. It would do nothing to humans. The frequency was harmless, the duration trivial. What it would do to the Shade, for those 3 seconds, was strip away the photoreceptive layer that controlled their surface mimicry. For 3 seconds, the 19 officers in that ceremony bay would look exactly like what they were. Kira watched it on the relay feed. There was no other word, terrible. Not violent. Not gory. Simply wrong in the most fundamental way, like watching a word you've known all your life suddenly reconfigure into a combination of letters that meant nothing. The 19 figures changed. Their skin changed. Their eyes changed. Their proportions shifted slightly, and their shadows moved, and for 3 seconds 31 billion people saw the thing that had been living among them for 200 years. "Ord-1 is targeting us," said the Ashford's tactical officer, his voice steady. "Don't fire unless fired upon," Lund said. She was standing at the command console with her hands clasped behind her back, which Kira had learned meant she was thinking very hard. "Hail them. They're not responding. Then broadcast in the open. All frequencies." She cleared her throat. "This is Captain Seriva Lund of the ENAS Ashford. To all vessels in this formation, what you have seen broadcast is documented and verified. The evidence is now distributed globally and cannot be retracted. The Atlantic Accord transfer is suspended pending investigation. Any vessel that targets this ship or any of the 4 vessels under my coordination will be engaging human military forces in an act of war. I am requesting that all human crew members aboard any compromised vessel take control of their vessels by any means necessary." A silence on the open channel. Then, "Captain Lund." A voice she recognized. One of Accord 1's junior officers, a woman who'd been at the ceremony briefing, who'd shaken Kira's hand 3 days ago and registered a heartbeat. "This is Lieutenant Commander Yael Obi of Accord 1. We've secured the bridge. Standing by." Then another voice, "Accord 3, we're with you, Captain." And then a third and a fourth. Admiral Crest, the thing that was Admiral Crest, made a decision in the ceremony bay that Kira learned about afterward from a recording. He gathered the other Shade in the bay. His mimicry was still in place. He looked like a decorated human officer. He spoke to them in the Shade language, which no recording system had ever cleanly captured because the frequency range partially overlapped with system white noise in ways that electronic dampeners normalized out. What the recording caught, through a separate channel, was a human aide's terrified description of what he witnessed. The 19 figures stopped moving. Completely. For approximately 40 seconds, they were perfectly still, in various positions, like a photograph. Then they resumed moving. They had made a collective decision. They stood down. Not in defeat, not in surrender, but with the composed patience of a species that had been waiting 2 centuries and understood that waiting was still an option. They had not been exposed in error, they had been exposed by evidence, by a human who had done the work, and the work was now globally distributed and verified. This was not a cover-up scenario. This was a different category of situation, and the Shade, whatever else they were not stupid. Crest walked to the ceremony bay communications terminal and requested an open channel to Captain Lund. "We'll need time," he said. His voice was the same voice, the same measured authority. Nothing in it acknowledged what had happened. For an agreement of this scale, conducted between a civilization of your development and one of ours, adequate time is required. "An agreement," Lund said. "That was always the intention. The timeline was ours. Perhaps, going forward, the timeline can be shared." Lund looked at Kira. Kira thought about Tomas Veer, who was almost certainly dead. She thought about the 70 names on his list, the ones with lines through them. She thought about the thing in Elias Vorn's chest, producing electrical signals 4 hours after his death. "You'll withdraw from every governmental and military position immediately," Lund said. "All of them. Globally. You'll provide a full accounting of which positions are compromised. And you'll do it publicly, in coordination with human authorities." A long pause. "That's a significant concession," Crest said. "You've been in our governments for 200 years without consent," Lund said. "I'm being generous." Another pause. "We'll need time," Crest said again. "You have it," Lund said. "You're not going anywhere." The weeks that followed were the most complicated in human history, and Kira was not present for most of them. She was present for the first interrogation of a Shade official, an experience that, in her later written account, she described as talking to someone who is entirely reasonable about something entirely unreasonable. She was present for the first joint human-Shade communication session, conducted by the Xenolinguistics team from the Helsinki Institute, including Dr. Farido Say, who had appeared on Vorn's contact list and turned out to have been documenting anomalies in his own department for 11 years. "I thought I was going mad," he told her, over very bad coffee in a provisional meeting room on Platform 7. The platform had been designated neutral territory. It felt appropriate. "I kept noticing that 3 of my senior colleagues never ate. In 11 years, I never saw them consume a meal. What did you do with that information?" "I wrote it in my personal journal and tried to think about something else." He smiled, slightly. "Not everyone is a detective." The world processed the broadcast in ways that were sometimes frightening and sometimes extraordinary. There was fear, significant, genuine fear, and there was a period of political instability in 7 nations where Shade officials had held senior positions. There were protests, and there were calls for retaliation, and there were movements that used the revelation as justification for things that had nothing to do with it. This was, Kira thought, simply what humanity did with information that was too large. But there were also other things. There were scientists who had spent their careers in xenobiology who cried when they saw the footage, not from fear but from vindication. There were philosophers who had spent decades arguing the question, what would we do if we were not alone, and now found the question answered. There were children who grew up in the years that followed for whom the Shade was simply a fact of the world, strange and complicated and present, the way all the most important things were. The Shade withdrew from their positions, as agreed. It took 14 months, and was monitored by a joint commission that included, at Kira's insistence, 3 members of Veer's former network, people who had spent years watching and losing people and had earned the right to verify. Kira attended the final verification briefing, sat in a room and went through a list of positions, name by name, checking them off. When it was done, she sat alone for a while. She thought about Veer. She thought about first contact, real first contact, not the cautious, controlled, hypothetical version that humans had planned for, but the version that had actually happened, 2 centuries of coexistence that one species had known about and one hadn't, ending not in war but in a very difficult conversation that was going to take a very long time. She thought about the 16 warships and 4 orbital platforms that were now back under verified human command, their weapon system authentication codes reset, their command staff audited twice and audited again. She thought about the corridor, the signal corridor that the Shade had intended to open. Whether it was still coming. Whether, now that the plan had changed, it might come differently. Whether, in the end, the thing the Shade had been reaching toward, contact between their civilization and humanity's, might happen on terms that were negotiated rather than imposed. She thought about the size of everything. She went back to the Orbital Transit Hub. Not for a case, she was on administrative leave, pending the review that everyone knew would eventually conclude with her reinstated and decorated, a conclusion that embarrassed her in advance. She went because it was where it had started, in that corridor, with a body that was too warm and eyes that reflected light wrong and a silence where a heartbeat should have been. She stood in the corridor where Elias Vorn had died. The floor was clean. The windows still showed the Pacific. The building systems hummed at their designed temperature of 21 degrees Celsius. A cleaning drone hummed past, recognized her biometric signature, and diverted politely around her. She thought about what Veer had said, "They don't hate humans. They simply do not consider us in their calculation." She wondered if that would change. She suspected it would take a very long time either way, The Shade moved on timescales that were not human timescales, and patience was perhaps their defining characteristic. 2 centuries of waiting was, to them, not long. She found she wasn't afraid of them. She wasn't sure when that had happened. Somewhere between the pathology lab and the ceremony bay, the fear had transformed into something more useful, a clear-eyed recognition that the universe was full of things she didn't understand, that some of those things had been here longer than she had, and that the appropriate response to that fact was not terror but attention. Pay attention, she thought. That's all it was, in the end. Someone paid attention. Her phone rang. Physical ring. She answered. Detective Voss. A voice she didn't recognize. Young, careful, with a slight accent that she associated, without knowing why, with someone who'd grown up learning a language that wasn't native to them. My name is... There isn't a word in your language for what my name is. But I was told by someone in my community that you would be the appropriate person to speak with. Kira was quiet for a moment. About what? She asked. About an honest accounting. A pause. We've been here for 2 centuries. We've done things that require accounting. I've been chosen to begin that process, on behalf of my people. She looked out at the Pacific. All right, she said. Meet me at Mariners Green. Southeast corner. Tomorrow at 0700. She paused. Come alone. The Atlantic Accord was formally renegotiated over 11 years, resulting in the Helsinki Framework of 2211, the first treaty between a human government and a non-terrestrial civilization. The Shade, who number approximately 4,000 individuals currently resident on Earth, exist today in a status that has no precise legal precedent. The 16 warships of the original Accord fleet were eventually returned to joint administration, on terms negotiated with full human consent. Tomas Veer's body was found in an apartment in Copenhagen 6 weeks after the ceremony. He had died, apparently of natural causes, several days before Kira reached the Ashford. He was 67 years old. He had spent 41 years working on a problem that was solved by someone who was paying attention. Detective Kira Voss returned to active duty 7 months after the events described above. She is currently head of the newly created Interspecies Liaison Division of the European Security Directorate. She finds the work interesting. She keeps her secondary office. She still uses physical paper. Old habits.